It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing The Golem of Brooklyn by Adam Mansbach.
Which was a reader request.
It was indeed, and it turns out to actually be Wizards versus Lesbians.
I would never have picked this up, so thank you, reader, who requested it. And it indeed actually does, yeah. So, okay, why don't you do the plot, because you've read it more recently than I have.
All right. In Brooklyn, there dwells a schmuck. Our schmuck is a teacher at a private arts school private arts high school in Brooklyn. Actually, he's an art teacher at a private high school in Brooklyn. But some combination of those words gets you to what he is. One weekend, he's been stealing clay from his job gradually over time. And one day he gets really, really high and he makes the golem. He's not the first person to make the golem. The golem, there's only ever been one of, stretching back through time, thousands of years. And theoretically, you're supposed to be a rabbi or a prophet in order to make the golem, but he's neither of those things, and he manages to make the golem anyway. This leads to some comical difficulties, as one might imagine. But he, with the help of a woman that he knows from down at the corner store at the bodega, because he knows that she speaks Yiddish, he manages to communicate with the golem, and she turns out to be
an ex-Haredi lesbian.
Yes, who's recently left a Haredi community in Brooklyn.
Gone OTD, as they say.
Yes, off the... Ooh, you can't say that, actually. But anywho...
I hadn't even realized that one.
It's a completely different... But anywho... So together they teach the golem English, although the golem mostly learns English from watching TV. And
watching a whole lot of Curb Your Enthusiasm, right?
Yes. And the golem asks them, okay, so why am I here? And they do not have a particularly good answer for him. But then the golem finds out about Charlottesville. And the rest of the story is essentially a road trip in which they are worried that the golem is going to go to the next right-wing rally in Kentucky and commit mass murder there. And they have mixed feelings about whether that's a good idea.
Yes.
And that's the short version. Are
there wizards?
I believe that by making the golem, our hero is a wizard. By dint of making the golem, that's pretty high up there.
When we did the Dyke and the Dybbuk, we established that wonder rabbis are wizards, and I feel like if you are thus making the golem makes you at least you have done a wizardly act.
Yes. And our heroine, her whole entire life is pretty much shaped by the fact that she is a lesbian and that she chose being a lesbian over the community that she grew up in, from which she was exiled for lesbianism. So pretty high on the lesbian scale there.
Yes. And they do actually have some conflict.
They argue a lot. A lot over some very important things.
Yes. This is also just two Jews on a road trip, so obviously they're going to fight, but...
Yes. So yes, this is Wizards versus Lesbians.
Yeah.
Why should you read this book?
It's funny because when I looked up the summary, I thought this book sounded excruciatingly awful. And was like, nope, I've not read this and I have no interest in reading it. But I did because I do try to give every reader recommendation a read. And then I actually found myself first reluctantly charmed by it, and by the end, pretty thoroughly charmed by it.
Yeah, I would say it does exceed expectations. Everything about the way that it's presented makes you think that it's going to be just an insufferable New York book, which it is. But also, it's very funny in places, which is helpful. Some of the set pieces are really good. It has the classic sort of Yiddish folktale style in which there are sort of digressive stories layered in that all comment on the central tale, which I love. It pulls that off really well. And yeah, there are are moments of, there are moments of genuine insight, and you can come away with this with a lot of, interesting stuff in your head.
On top of all of that, like it's fairly well written, for all that it has all these digressions, the pacing actually works pretty well. I found it to just be extremely readable.
Yes, this book was written by somebody who knows what they're doing. This person can put a story together, and we'll also wink at you a little bit if you're quick enough on the uptake to be following along. So that's nice. Why shouldn't you read this book?
Well, it's extremely stressful, and also occasionally it can get a little bit insufferable.
Yes, I think that there are. It lets itself down in a few ways, to me personally, and unfortunately, a lot of that is kind of very central to what the book is trying to do. I think this book is cowardly. I think this book is setting out to really, explain the world and to set everything out fairly and not tell the reader what to think, and yet has such a central omission to its concept that it essentially falls apart, and is also like wildly offensive about Southerners for no particular reason.
Yeah, well, that's one of the ways in which it is insufferable.
Yeah, and so I'm going to have a lot to say about that, but so I think that as a whole, as a piece of art, this is a failure, but I think that it's an entertaining one and worth reading.
I really do not want our argument about the central omission, whether or not it has a central omission that dooms it as a piece of art, to dominate the podcast. But yeah, we can argue about that one.
We do a pretty good job keeping it contained, but this is still the episode where we talk about Israel. So if you don't want to hear that, skip forward to about
19 minutes and 20 seconds.
The obvious big content warning is anti-Semitism.
There's also a fair amount of violence.
Yep. And cult stuff. The Hasids are cultists. There's really no way around that.
Mm-hmm. There's a described sex scene, which
no, I mean, I think that technically some kind of sexual assault has happened, but it's very difficult to tell.
It's very difficult to tell
who did it to
and
whom
what?
and what was going on. So, one of the cringiest sex scenes that we've ever encountered, but on purpose.
Yes, which is described like it is. Yes, deliberately cringy. It is being recounted as opposed to happening immediately on the page. And it's definitely the sort of thing that if somebody wrote an actual piece about this, it would, about this happening to them on either side of the sex scene, it would spark a gajillion think pieces about, consent and gray areas.
Yes,
so.
But because we've already established that, we're going for the sort of heightened tone and absurdism that you get in like Jewish folktales, it sort of falls under that. And I think in the context of the book doesn't rise to the level of, offensive. It's more, it's a metaphor. Everything's a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, and personally I found it actually really quite funny, but still, when we're talking about content warnings, this is the sort of thing that, if I guess you're the sort of person who read Cat Person and got triggered, like, just be aware that there is some really weird, first time having sex scene in here.
Yes. Yeah. And, I mean, I would say like this book does a really good job of if you have been very surprised to find yourself suddenly with very different political takes from people who are close to you. This book does a very good job of explaining how one might arrive at that, which is great. But it also does have this person who I really looked up to is way more into killing than I expected. I think that's a really distressing thing too that many of us have had to deal with recently. So content warning for that.
All right.
is the spoiler zone. All right, into the book we go. So yeah, should we get the Israel stuff out of the way first, and then, or should we wait till the end, basically?
Well, let's get it out of the way first, with the agreement that we're not going to spend the entire podcast talking about it.
Absolutely. So the thing is that I think that this book does a really good job of like explaining historical anti-Semitism and its unique elements and the longevity of it, and like all these different examples of it from across time, and gives you a really good idea of why the characters feel the way they do and the way that they react the way they do, and I think that's great. But nobody tells the Golem about Israel. Nobody tells the Golem that Israel exists.
Yeah, it's true.
There's a really mealy-mouthed, like, oh, Jews make up about the same percentage of the population that they used to, so things haven't changed bit, which is bullshit, and is really just avoiding a very obvious point that this Golem, who is a machine designed to murder anti-Semites, does not know that Israel has been reestablished throughout the entire book, and it doesn't occur to anybody to tell it. And I think that just boggles my mind. And the only reason that this has been omitted is so that the author can avoid talking about it.
Well, I mean, you could argue that you could argue that the entire book is about Israel, and that,
you could. That it is true that you
so if right, like bringing is to some degree to some degree the entire book is about Israel, and bringing Israel into the book thus complicates the metaphor, because the core question of the book is how much murder of it is justifiable for Jewish safety.
Yes. No, I think that you're right that it is doing that, but the fact that it does this via the once removed metaphor leads to other problems. And it leads to one of the other major problems was that, okay, if we're not talking about Israel-Palestine here, and in fact, we're using another thing to think about Israel-Palestine, we are going to, make up a Ku Klux Klan when one already exists that you could have used. There are many things that you could have used, but you had to make up a new one for some reason. Again, it feels kind of cowardly that you don't actually call out a particular organization that actually exists. But secondly, that you have to then sort of create a degree of foaming anti-Semitism in Kentucky that doesn't exist. And in doing so, overwrite civil rights, overwrite anti-blackness, because that's what Charlottesville was mostly about.
Charlottesville, they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us."
That was one thing that they chanted.
Over and over again.
You know that how they thought the Jews were not going to replace us? By
yes,
replacing
I'm well
them
aware.
with black people. However,
right, but
I know that it's part of the same. Now we are. Now we are two Jews, three opinions. But
right, but look here. The thing is, I do not think that it is fair to say that this book is overblowing anti-Semitism. I think that I think that you are downplaying this because it's a group that you belong to, honestly.
I don't think it's overblowing anti-Semitism as a universal phenomenon. I think that it is overblowing anti-Semitism in America. And I think it's overblowing anti-Semitism in Kentucky. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I was just in Kentucky. And I went downtown in this small town in Kentucky that I was staying last night, and there was a giant mural, and it said Rosenberg Square. And I happened to know that the Rosenberg in Rosenberg Square was a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor who had been one of the town's 2 Jewish lawyers for the last 30 or 40 years. And the mural was weird because they were celebrating this man and his life, which would not occur in the cartoon Kentucky that this book takes place in. But apparently, the mural just sort of didn't have anything to do with anything, and I asked about that, and he was a civil rights lawyer. The thing that the town objected to was any of the civil rights imagery for this mural. And that's the thing that I want to avoid. And that's the thing that I think this book commits. Not entirely, but I think this book commits that. I think in making this cultural movement more about us than about blacks in America, it misses something incredibly important.
Yeah, except the thing is, people are allowed to talk about their own oppression. And I think that it's not fair to say that you can't write a book about modern anti-Semitism in America without making it all about other people's oppression first.
I mean, well, clearly,
I think, look, yes, anti-blackness is obviously a huge problem in this country. And, yes, anti-blackness is a real part of the anti-Semitism that goes on in this country. I know this partly because, the guy who was collecting rifle parts and bombs to target all the local Jewish business owners here in Ithaca, include, a lot of the unhinged posters he was putting on the Jewish businesses did things like, use a lot of anti-black racial slurs and talk about the Great Replacement theory. So I'm well aware of how, integral this is to American anti-Semitism in particular. But I don't think it's fair to say that you have to write a book that, when you're writing a book that is specifically about the, largely about sort of the disillusionment of realizing that anti-Semitism is still a problem in America in the, wake of Charlottesville. And I mean, look, when people were talking about Charlottesville, they said that the only thing that was chanted was, "You will not replace us." And that maybe they said Jews once or twice, but it wasn't very clear. And then I heard the recording, and it was it was an incredibly clear word.
No, I'm aware of that. And just as a related thing, when Elon Musk did a full-on Heil Hitler Nazi salute at Trump's inauguration, everybody said that, oh no, he was just moving his arm, including Benjamin Netanyahu and the ADL. So
yeah, I'm not going to defend either Netanyahu or the ADL.
But I'm saying that I understand that there is a lot of downplaying of anti-Semitism in this country by all kinds of people, but but the thing is that I think that the particular way in which this book should have been about Israel and was instead about this made-up bunch of cracker, anti-Semitic cops in this made-up town in their made-up organization in Kentucky.
People are allowed to write about Charlottesville and not make it all about Israel.
No, but this book is, you just said that this book is about Israel. It's not about Charlottesville.
This book, it's about both, though. That's the thing. Because you're right. The question of Israel is, bound up in a lot of what, American discussions of anti-Semitism in a variety of ways. But part of it is that what this often comes down to in-group discussions is how much murder of people who want us dead is acceptable for Jewish safety. And, some people go all the way over to genocide, and some people go all the way over to, honestly, it's fine if we all get wiped out.
I personally haven't heard that one in the wild, I've heard people saying that people think that, but never actually heard anybody say it. I'm sure it exists.
But you can talk, but you don't have to, the thing is that this is a response to Charlottesville, which really was an awakening moment for a lot of people. And some of those people reacted by up and moving to Israel. So, but other people really want to stay in America and keep it talking about America. And to some degree, I actually think it's an interesting and useful and artistically valuable choice to try to explore this question in a sort of, what is a world where we don't have to talk about Israel all the fucking time?
Okay. I do not agree, but I think that's a cogent argument. We can probably wrap up this discussion at this point if you'd like.
Okay. I feel like we have said our pieces.
Yes, we have. All right. But there are many other things that happen in this book, and many of them are much more enjoyable than this.
Yes. And I mean, also, I'm totally with you on how unfair this is to to Southerners.
Yes.
I'm totally with you on how this, this is one of the ways in which it is an insufferable New York book. And, speaking as somebody who's from Atlanta and has spent a lot of time around insufferable New Yorkers.
No, it really does it puts a lampshade on the whole New Yorker, everything outside of New Jersey and most of New Jersey also is the wilds, and you might be like cannibalized there, but it also just sort of recapitulates that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, honestly, reading this book in some ways was very useful in oh yeah, that's why I'm, glad that I actually live quite some ways from New York City. Like,
oh yeah.
honestly, easy access to kosher Parmesan is not worth having to put up with these people.
Yes, agreed.
With
100% agreed.
insufferable
As somebody who
Brooklynites.
spent 7 years living in New York City, absolutely. Boy, never again. But anyway, yes. So it does draw attention to that, but it also pretty much does that as well, which is kind of another problem.
Yeah.
But there are some things about it that are good.
There's actually lots of things about
There
it
are
that
lots
are
of things
good.
about it that are good. I mean, speaking of like, who, so let's go back to that theme. So yes, this is the big theme of this book is how much murder is acceptable to protect Jews. And I think that, there are some people who would say none. Our wizard is on the none side. Although I don't think he would go as far as to say that, we should all peacefully line up and go to the camps, as you suggested earlier. But Miri, it turns out, doesn't think this and thinks that an amount of murder is acceptable. And in fact, when she gets to the Klan rally in Kentucky, she was like, actually, yes, please go ahead and kill them all. And I think that the book does a remarkable job at making both of these positions both human, relatable, and like you can understand why they arrived at that, which is the best thing that it does.
Yeah. I agree that is one of the things it does really well.
Yes. The trauma in Miri, like, who has mostly been traumatized by Jews, let's be clear.
Yes.
Like, the thing that she is hiding from is her people. And the thing that has made her terrified of everything that isn't her people is also her people. But, she came by that trauma honestly, and it is talking through her when she says, kill them all at that moment. Whereas our schmuck has really never had to do anything difficult in his entire life.
Right. So it's much easier for him to be like, well, maybe we shouldn't be killing them all, actually.
Yes, no, he's our lib. He is our liberal. He's a sort of a gentle, largely, beneficent stoner. His best friend is his
weed dealer.
Lebanese, I think.
Yes.
His best friend is Lebanese. They get along great, even though, one of them is a Jew, one of them is a Muslim. They're living in, the sort of the multicultural melting pot utopia version of Brooklyn, which really doesn't resemble most of Brooklyn, but hey ho. And it certainly resembles the richest parts of Brooklyn. I'll tell you that. When you start moving away from those, it doesn't resemble them very much anymore. But he's lived a charmed life. He got this great job, which he's clearly not super qualified for. And he makes money doing an Airbnb scam, which I thought was, or not. He doesn't do the scam, but actually, I'm going to double down on this. Airbnb is by its nature a scam. Using it for any purpose is a scam. And if you own a property which you rent out using Airbnb, I have Mary's style views on whether you should be allowed to live or not. He basically supports himself on top of his school supply by doing the grift of this generation, which is is exploiting a loophole in property law or government funding or et cetera to like make money for free, which he does. And yeah, no, the fact that he has never really had to wrestle with any of these questions before he makes the golem purely out of boredom, as far as I can tell, is, I think, key to this, conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing I like is that neither of them stay. It's not like they're there to represent their specific opinions and, carefully regurgitate talking points. Like you
Mhm.
can watch them both go back and forth about where they actually fall on this question throughout. And part of this is what happens when confronted with violence is one of them goes, okay, no, actually this is terrible. We need to decommission the golem. And the other one goes, okay, no, actually we should kill them all.
Yes, this violence protects me, and I understand violence and as a form of protecting me because the community that I grew up in have their own cops, have their own extra legal militia, essentially, that patrols our own neighborhood, and we are trying to hustle a congressman to expropriate. In fact, that's the first thing that the golem is used for. We found a cartoonishly anti-Semitic upstate New York congressman to kill via scaring him to death. But but the first thing that the golem is used for is to try to get a sweetheart real estate deal for and to cut government red tape for the Hasids so they can do the thing that they like to do, which is to move en masse to a place outside of New York and basically take over the school board and the local elections so that it can be run as a sort of mini state. And yeah, so I mean, and that is presented as in just the flattest terms possible. No attempt is made to excuse that. It's just, yeah, that sure is what's happening. And yeah, no, the guy who did it was in the actual trench in Poland. He was a kid who survived a literal, Nazi massacre in Poland by, being buried under the corpses of his family and then crawling out later. But he sure is doing this now. And incidentally, he doesn't like gay people very much. He's not a friend to our lesbian. And I really like the way that that's just presented as, yeah, these two things are true. This is the world, and also it's kind of funny, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things this book definitely comes down on is the trauma, suffering is not noble and trauma does not make you a better person.
Oh, absolutely.
And trauma does not make your communities better. And, I mean, you can understand why this guy would want his own separate little fiefdom town where, he can feel safe.
God,
but
yeah.
of course, but at the same time, it's very clear that not even everybody in his community is going to be safe, which is why poor Miri had to bail.
Yeah.
But
and God, you think, it's not even, poor Miri is, one example, but you think of enclaves like this, situations like this, horrific abuse.
Yes.
Just constantly can't be reported. There is no authority to reach out to. You take it.
And of course,
gets
one
passed
thing,
down.
and I don't want to go too far off, but it's particularly hard for ex-Haredi kids to leave because often they don't even have particularly good English.
Yeah. No, they.
I mean, it is. That's why it is plot relevant. That Miri's first language is Yiddish, and that and she, Len, our stoner, finds this out because he's in the bodega at one point while she's working there, and she cusses out she cusses out some Haredi kids who are misbehaving, and he's like, "Oh, I guess she speaks Yiddish."
Yes. Let's talk about Miri a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about Miri. Great character.
Great character.
She's really, I mean, it's funny because she gets kind of downplayed on in the cover copy, which is, and I really feel like she is the key to what makes the book work.
She's actually the main character of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is,
Len is just useless. Essentially, Len is way more of a stalking horse or a straw man than she is.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, that, and so it's funny because she's really downplayed in the book's marketing, even though she's way more interesting. But the book, I mean, the book doesn't work without her because without her, this book is just the incredibly insufferable, Brooklyn novel that it initially pretends to be.
Yes.
And so
And
poor
which,
Miri.
which occasionally is, some of the nested digressions are more that than not, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely. Look, yes, but the thing is that the reason this book is more than just that is,
Yes.
is because of Miri.
Yes.
And, including Miri, who lost her virginity in a particularly terrible way.
My favorite part of the book. I mean, really just so overwhelmingly horrible and yet so redolent and full of meaning,
And honestly, I thought that, that scene it's so good, partly because I'm generally somebody who's deeply allergic to secondhand cringe humor. It has to be really well done for me to be able to tolerate it. And in this case, it is really well done. I spent the entire time cringing, but still able to read it. Partly, I think it works better because you're not seeing it through her eyes as it's happening in a memory. You're hearing her recount it. And so, you're getting the sense that she's already gotten some emotional distance from sort of this mutual gaslighting that she and the first lesbian she ever sleeps with are doing to each other.
Yeah, well, let's recount the basics of this so that people know what we're talking about.
Okay, so she meets a cute girl who's flirting with her, and this is her first. She's fresh out of the Haredi community. She has no idea what to do. She and the girl attempt to have sex. She does something unspecified that hurts the other woman, runs away, messages her pretending to be her imaginary identical twin sister who's a homophobe and trying to destroy her love life, asks if they can try again, binge watches a ridiculous amount of lesbian porn so that she knows how this works, goes back, has a much more pleasant experience with this woman, is great, solved that. Then the woman contacts her fake sister, and is actually, I kind of want to do it with you again, because I've always had a thing for, evil twins. And then reveals that actually she knew all... Oh, and then Miri pretends to accuse her of two-timing her with her own sister, who again is imaginary, at which point the woman reveals that she knew the whole thing was a lie and was doing this just to see how far Miri would take it.
Yes. So, putting aside that this cute lesbian that Miri met is a complete psychopath,
right?
Which is just sort of icing on the cake. But this is obviously about Miri, and it's about we've had a lot of very good or double consciousness metaphors. We've had a lot of very bad double consciousness metaphors. This is the single best double consciousness metaphor that we have had. I take this over Byron Cormoran's brain getting split in half any fucking day, This is I do in fact have a homophobic twin sister who is, who can't handle any of what's happening right now. And in fact, that is also me. And, we're both in this body together, and the act of trying to live as a woman and as a sexual being, given that these two things are true about me at the same time, turns my life into a farce. Like this,
Yes.
Because it immediately leads me to lying to everybody that I meet, because I don't even know how to tell the truth, because I have two people inside me who have very different opinions about everything. They say there are two lions inside you, and I don't even want to get into what they might be doing in there. Which is, it's a really neat way to express that.
Yes, and it's also the context in which she's telling this is that they're on a road trip, right? Len has broken his elbow, and
yes.
She's telling him this story to distract him while they try to make it to the nearest emergency room.
Yes, it's yes, I mean, I would never voluntarily tell this story to anybody outside a situation like this, but if you wanted to distract him from his elbow, what a story.
Right?
This is like my first aid story that I used to distract people from their pain because they're going to be completely busy imagining what kind of a horrible like mess I am to have gone through this and all this stuff. My jaw
like,
getting further and further open as she goes along.
So,
It's also, I mean, it's also to a certain degree about, going back to the like, so what's a Jew then? Which is another question that's sort of at the heart of this story. So, what is like two Jews, three opinions. There are a million ways of construing what being a Jew is,
mm-hmm.
and like, but they're all Jew,
Including the little girl.
Yes, including the little. We will need to talk about the little girl.
We absolutely need to talk about the little girl.
Yeah, but like,
right? You've got like pretty. You've got extremely secular Jews. You've got your Haredi. There's a weird thing where you don't actually get to see much in the middle, but.
Well, I mean,
but
yeah,
actually,
the book can
honestly,
only be so long, I suppose.
And actually, no, that's not fair because Miri is. Miri
has ended up in the middle
she's ended up in the middle, which is actually there's a fair amount of people who leave ultra orthodoxy and end up as reform or conservative, or I don't even belong to a synagogue but I still keep kosher, and then there's a lot of people who start out secular and end up maybe I don't even belong to a synagogue, but I've started to keep kosher. So it is actually, I liked that about Miri. I liked that, I thought that was both realistic, and also it continues to add nuance to the question of what is a Jew, because
absolutely
she is, she's still figuring that out for herself, and we get to watch her do some of that, and the answer isn't going to be everything about this is worthless and terrible.
Yeah. And it's like and I think this parable, I'm going to call it a parable. I like this story so much that I'm going to call it a parable.
The parable of Miri
and her sister. Yes. The parable of Miri's sister. But it's like, okay, I'm showing up to this sexual encounter as two Jews, One of them is the neurotic to the point of self-imposed frigidity Woody Allen archetype, / homophobic, we do it for procreation only, ultra orthodox archetype.
No, actually, I'm gonna factually correct you there. Even the ultra orthodox, that's a Christian thing. Sex is never for procreation only. And in fact, there's a long Jewish tradition of you can divorce your husband if he's not keeping you happy in bed.
Sorry, yes,
sex on Shabbos for procreation or otherwise is a mitzvah. So.
Thank you. That was my Christian half coming through there, and I do apologize. I will retract that. So I'll focus purely on the Woody Allen,
yes,
the slapstick, horror, sex horror comedy neurosis thing, which is part of how the Jewish thing, the enormous Jewish thing, and then
and I mean also the losing. I mean the ways in which she is, the ultra religious thing is coming out is that you don't lose your virginity with some girl you met at a party. Right.
But then the next day,
especially
it's like,
not if you're especially not in a lesbian encounter.
Oh, is there the sort of if it's lesbian it doesn't really count bit going on in sort of from communities, or do we know? Do we have any way of knowing?
I mean we can ask Leora and do a jingle who knows something, who knows more than I do about the Haredi life. So and then maybe we can do a jingle update.
Okay, we'll find that out. But Spritzel and Händel are out in the shtetl, getting up to trouble in the barn. The elders get together and ask each other whether the girls are really doing any harm. Well, surely it's forbidden, and yes, absolutely it's forbidden. but it's not as forbidden as it could be. So don't have conniptions if they walk like the Egyptians. It's not like they're spilling any seed. But then the next day it's like, oh no, we the second day it's like, oh, I meant Jew as in, have you ever seen as many Jewish lesbians, Jewish trans people? You know, we are pushing the boundaries of sex, of kink. You know, like this is to me, Jewish Brooklyn is this. It's like standing outside a synagogue in Brooklyn and watching, like, you know, 100 they them lesbians walking out of services. You know, literally.
Which is increasingly the case in my small college town synagogue, which I'm very pleased about.
Yes, it's like we are also like very not repressed at the same time, you know, and so it's like there's so many ways to construe yourself as a Jew, and this is a way of showing that, you know, these things are also interacting within this concept. And so here's the segue to the little girl. You know, the little girl gets converted to Judaism by the Golem.
Yes, in the classic Hillel standing on one foot way.
Yes, this whole thing made me really uncomfortable, but also it was really good at the same time. But
yeah,
because of a technicality, which is the best way for reason to become Jewish, because of a technicality, and because you know, the Golem couldn't do the work for her dad because her dad was a Gentile, and her dad would rather not be circumcised right then. So instead, we have the daughter convert so that he can do the work for her. And he's like, okay. And the daughter's like, okay, convert me. And he's like, all right, I am not the rabbi. I do not really know how to do this, but this is good enough for Hillel. You know, he knew Rabbi Hillel personally.
Right, of course, because, you know, this is the same Golem, and he dates back, you know, his memories go back to Talmudic times and before.
But he knew Rabbi Hillel personally, and he was like, okay, I stand on one foot. I teach you the most important thing about Judaism, which is the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
That's what is hateful. That's really what is hateful to you. Do not do to others. But
right. And also Tikkun Olam, heal the world. That's, you know, I'll just throw that in as a sort of an extra.
Yes.
Because that's another thing that goes on in this book. And later Miri is like, maybe what Tikkun Olam means is kill all the antisemites, which I thought was a really, really dark joke.
Yes. And that's how the book ends.
Yes, that's the note on which the book ends. I mean, and that's foreshadowed because, you know, the Golem says that Larry David reminds him of Rabbi Hillel, who he met. And Len is like, great, you call up Hollywood famous, you know, liberal Jew Larry David, and you ask him whether we're going to kill all these people. And Larry David is like, yeah, kill them all, absolutely. Which is that thing about that moment of, oh, this person who I thought I was on the same page with, I'm not on the same page with, and all I needed was the rubber to hit the road for that to come out, you know?
Right. I mean, of course, some of this is just that Larry David. This is, you know, as far as he's concerned, this is a prank call.
Yes. No, I know. This is not meant to suggest that Larry David, if he had to think about this seriously, would say this, but, you know,
no.
Nonetheless,
but the thing is, right? But I mean, the thing is that I think that that's also important because it's a matter of, is this an abstract question or is this a real question?
Right. Exactly. Are you going to be there to watch them be crushed and burned and killed? You know, Larry. And it's really how the internet has allowed us to see everything that has made this discussion so pointed. I don't know what Larry's position on Israel is. I'm just going to say that. I have not found out most people's position on Israel. That is on purpose. That's interesting, Isaac. So why don't you want to find out these things? Why don't you want to have these discussions? Is it all tactics? Or are you just a coward? And, yeah, I'm a coward and a hypocrite. I was born and raised and nourished in a country that was founded on genocide as well. And I will say, if I'm going to be a coward and a hypocrite, at least I'm the kind that points it out in others as well. There's the golden rule, but another good one is that it takes one to know one. The point being that he explains this. This is a child's version of Judaism that he explains to her. It's like, don't do things that you wouldn't want to be. Don't do bad things to other people and make the world a better place. That's like the kids' version.
It's the kids' version, but I mean, it's part of 3 stories about how, comparing how Hillel and Shammai respond to potential converts. And the idea is when you're converting somebody, when a convert comes to you with a really bonkers demand, like, I will convert, but only if I get to, wear the high priest's vestments, or I'll convert, but I only want to hear the written Torah. I don't want to hear the oral Torah. Or I'll convert, but only if you can teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And in all 3 of these stories, Shammai hits the guy and tells him to fuck off. And Hillel,
Valid.
converts. And Hillel converts the guy and then, goes, well, actually, yes, haha, now you're trapped. Now you're a Jew and you have a whole lot of studying to do. And so, in this case, it's okay. Well, you learned the whole Torah standing on one foot. But it turns out it's very specifically, it says, the rest is commentary. It's just that there's a whole lot of commentary.
Yes, and much of that commentary includes like the world that we live in, the history of this people, the history of warfare, the history of inequality, the history of hatred.
Yeah, but also a lot of the commentary is stories specifically like this one, which got written down. And in this book, many of the commentaries are silly stuff about dolphin sex, but some of them are about mass murder. And honestly, if we're talking about the Talmud, it's not that much mass murder. It's much more weird sex and poop jokes.
It's true. I mean, the Talmud. I need to sit down and actually
and homoerotic friendships.
Yes.
Well, you're not going to be able to sit down and read the entire thing. But...
Well, that's why I stopped saying that. I was like, I need to read some excerpts.
Leora and I can link you to some of our favorites. Leora does a very good dramatic retelling of Rabbi Yohanan and Reish Lakish and their tragic, doomed gay romance.
I'm not going to explain the tragic, doomed gay romance because maybe you should check out the Talmud.
But but the thing is that why I'm bringing all this stuff up is that specifically Hillel is usually the majority opinion and Shammai is often the minority opinion. Like, we light our menorahs in the order that Hillel specified, not in the order that Shammai specified. Shammai said that you should start with 8 candles and reduce 1 per day to show the oil slowly running out. And
Hillel's like, have a sandwich. Let's focus on the positive.
Right. But so the thing is that this is a very weird little interlude where there's just this random girl in Kentucky or West Virginia or whatever. I can't remember at what stage in the road trip they're in at this point.
Yeah, I think it's West Virginia, you're right.
And who gets like just randomly converted to Judaism because of a technicality, but at the same time it's sort of hearkening back to the era before conversion got to be so ridiculously formalized, where you need 12 to 18 months of study and all of this. I mean, and that is, again, actually part of modern Judaism, is this debate of what does conversion look like and what can. So I feel like there's actually layers going on here, not just the joke.
Yeah, no, I what I was going to go on to say was that I feel like, I know a number of people who have expressed interest in converting to Judaism or have actually converted to Judaism. And in a number of cases, the thing that makes Judaism attractive to people who are maybe less intimately culturally connected to it is the version of it where it's like, you don't have to believe in God. Jews don't have to believe in God. You don't have to. All you have to do is think about God. You don't have to. It's fine if God doesn't exist for you. You don't have to. You can pick and choose what you want out of the religion. You don't have to do the kosher stuff if it's too hard for you. Whatever. Find a congregation that'll accept you in whatever version of it you want. The important things, are the Hillel things. It's the golden rule and tikkun olam, and you don't have to do anything else. And I understand that, as with Hillel, this is a trap. This is a ruse. You say the Jews don't evangelize. I feel like this is a trap.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, it's not like people go around being like, sign up for Judaism. Have you heard the word about Reish Lakish?
No, what they do is go around and say, "You look Jewish. Are you a Jew?" And then be like, "If so, then be our kind of Jew."
Right. First of all, that's just Chabad. But also, if you the key difference here is that you say no, and Chabad loses interest in you.
He just walks right away. Yeah.
Yeah, you say yes, and they zero in. And you know, they feed college students chicken soup and meat dinners, and that's a remarkably effective method of evangelizing, apparently.
It would have worked on me in college. Why didn't we have Chabad at UNC? Or if so, why weren't they feeding me beef dinners?
Well, they wouldn't have been interested in you.
Yes, and here's a thing that I would like to bring up, as long as we're talking about all of this. My name is Isaac. I am the son of a Jew. When I was 10 years old, my father sat me down and said, "Son, you may not be a Jew in the eyes of Judaism, but you would have been a Jew in the eyes of Hitler. So think about that." And I have been thinking about that for the last 30 years.
You are a Jew by Reform Halacha, so.
Yes, in the eyes of some Jews. I am in fact Jewish. Once again, what is a Jew? There are so many ways to be a Jew. There are so many concepts of what being a Jew is. But this leads, the thing that this has led me to is the thing that I have the most distrust of is the thing where one uses one's ethnic identity as a way to commit violence, either in self-defense or in imaginary self-defense,
or in preemptive self-defense.
Yes.
Which somehow, what defines preemptive just gets, the horizon gets wider and wider.
Gets wider and wider and wider and wider, yeah. And so, I mean, I don't think that I need to specify which side of the discussion that this book brutes that I am on. I think that I've made that pretty clear. But I will say that I felt a lot of emotions reading this book. I felt like my experience of Judaism was included in what this book thought the Judaism is. And I did appreciate and enjoy that, despite not ultimately agreeing with many of the ways in which it went about, laying out its arguments.
And honestly, one thing that I also really appreciated about how this book tackles the question is that it isn't just a question of, morally how much violence is acceptable. It's also a question of tactically how much violence is acceptable. Because one of the things that keeps coming up is, will murdering these anti-Semites actually make us safer? And
yes, this is again the sort of Lev's argument is that but then again, I'm also not a huge fan of appeasement in the face of violence. So that's a more an open question to me personally, and certainly one worth thinking about, though.
Right, but I mean, if you've already decided the amount of violence that's acceptable is 0, then it doesn't really matter.
Right, exactly.
If you've decided that the amount of violence is some, and if you've decided that the amount of violence is maximum, then it probably doesn't matter, because at that point it's not about Jewish safety; it's about revenge.
Right. Well, it's about Jewish safety in that this doesn't actually work in the real world.
Right.
But
the thing is, and the book makes it pretty clear, actually, that this is not going to make Jews safer. That even that having the golem going around murdering anti-Semites is not going to make Jews safer.
You can go and live in the Jewish homeland where Jews are the people who are in charge of everything, and you're never going to experience like anti-Semitism on the street or get hate crimed. You just might get a missile trap. Right. You have to be the right kind of Jew. You have to be the right kind of Jew. And also, you might get a missile dropped on you. Just a couple of missiles here and there, but that's a small price to pay. You might get suicide bombed, but that's a small price to pay, for wreaking revenge on the Gentile world.
Also, and the other thing is that this is, again, where actually the golem works pretty well as a metaphor for Israel, is that it's not just about, are you going to be safe in the state of Israel or in your little town? What's going to happen to the diaspora? Like,
they don't really think about that, which is another thing that really
yeah,
endears
and
them to me.
and should they, or should they only think about their own safety? This is why, again, I think that the book is actually doing a pretty good job of tackling these questions. And given the way that a lot of people's brains turn off in a variety, on a variety of positions when the word Israel is mentioned, I think, I still think that it's a reasonable thing to say, okay, well, let's tackle these questions outside of that, because it does. It looks at, what is this going to, what do we owe in terms of pursuing our own safety or revenge, in terms of violence that we at least claim is for our own safety. What do we owe the other Jews of the world when this ripples outward and the repercussions start hitting them? We'll be safe. We've got the golem right here.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I will say that that I think that the part of my brain that is like, no, this, you needed to be specific and really say this out loud, is not the part that is thinking about communicating things effectively to people who might not be receptive to your message. It's the part of me that wants things in my science fiction story to make internal sense, which is unfortunate because that's not a really good critical part of my brain. But I'm like, why they tell him? He would want to know. He would want to know that this had happened. Somebody tell him. Didn't he see it on TV? But anywho,
no, he didn't, because his entire exposure to media was a Curb Your Enthusiasm marathon, followed by like YouTube clips of the
taken while like incredibly high on mushrooms, also.
Yeah, followed by YouTube clips of the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the Ministry of Time, that's a media diet that'll radicalize you a certain way.
Right. So actually, and I do want to come slightly back to our little girl who gets converted, because the last time we see her, she's accompanied the golem to the edge of this rally, to this, Charlottesville round 2 in Kentucky. And the last thing she says to the golem is, she hugs him and she says, "Thank you for making me a Jew," which is real funny given that, the golem has to be like, "Fuck off before you get murdered, child."
Yes. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier, is like, you didn't read the fine print while you were standing on one foot, did you? About, the consequences of being made a Jew.
Well, it has been for centuries part of the conversion process is being asked, do you know what you're getting into? And then if you go, yes, this follow-up question is always, then why the fuck do you want to become a Jew? Like, that's a part of the conversion process. Yeah. When you get, your equivalent, you've written your essays and you're getting your equivalent of your oral exam, that's one of the first questions that gets asked.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, I'm glad that we have been able to have a productive conversation about this book, despite how, incredibly painful and inflammatory all of this stuff is. I do think that it is a good book. There were some things about it that really bothered me, mostly the way that it handled the Unite the Right people and doing the Unite the Right people.
And POV. Actually, now that we're doing Grumpy Zone, I think you're absolutely right that, because the KKK gets mentioned in this book. So we know that they do exist in this, ever so slightly alternate world. But so why did we have to make up the Southern Knights of the Venerable whatever? Just have them be the KKK or
have them be the Proud Boys, or any of the other actual right-wing fascist organizations that exist right now, that are targeting people like this.
And really, the Unite the Right rally was a combination of all of these. But I think making them a KKK pastiche actually ends up weakening the message. Both, it is indulging in the classic snotty New Yorker anti-Southern snobbery at the expense of painting an accurate portrayal of what the biggest threat, most threatening anti-Semitism in America really looks like today.
Yeah, no, that is exactly right. Now, I was really on board until that started happening, and then I started thinking about some of the other things that didn't make sense, basically, as is often my want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it feel that the problem is that the way that he portrays those people feels like hateful stereotyping, and
Yeah.
and it's like you can say, okay, tit for tat, fine, how do you like it? But it's like they've been dealing with it too,
Right. Also, as you've pointed out, there are Jews in the South.
Yes, there are, some of whom came down there to do good work and are valued members of their communities, went down there to do fucking tikkun olam, actually.
Yes, and to be fair, some of whom were, are descended from slave owners.
Yeah,
Slavers,
well,
I
we
think
don't.
is now
Yeah,
the
well, yeah,
term.
I mean, well, yeah. Gavin McGinnis, he is Canadian, so all I'm saying, you guys could have gone north. Gavin McGinnis, founder of the Proud Boys, incidentally.
But I mean, yes, there have been Jews in the South for a very long time, and while you don't necessarily have more, some of them are very lonely in their tiny southern towns. But and it's got to be hard when you can't make a minion. But still, still there is this sort of idea that. It's just, it did not have to be. This is where the author's snotty Brooklynite becomes a liability for the book.
Mm-hmm. I think that, I mean, there. I do like a lot of the. Let's move on to random notes since I think that we've covered that one. I'm not sure I should have retuned my guitar to play a Venu Malkanu earlier. It's having a hard time staying in tune. Anyway, it's time for minor notes. Like, here's one I forgot to mention. It's funny that Miriam knows the Marx tragedy and farce quote, and Lev doesn't.
Yep.
I do like a lot of the little, I like how that some of the digression stories are like extremely on the nose about what's going on, and some of them are you kind of have to think harder about to make them fit in with the rest of the story. I like how they sort of gradually get more on topic as we go. The story about like the person who did the Airbnb scam to them.
Yes.
Who Lev and his friend fly, to Europe to menace with pitchforks and rakes, with like a saw and a mattock or whatever it is they bought at the local hardware store, and she sits them down and is like, "Okay, are you in fact prepared to kill me? Also, I'm an Iraqi refugee. Are you actually prepared to kill me over this insult to you that I did? Again, it's the same theme,
right? Exactly.
But maybe, I love, and as the Golem says, I got it slightly wrong. What he actually said was, everything is a metaphor, dickhead. And that's like the author saying, this is what I'm doing with this book, in case you didn't notice.
Right.
And I have an Uncle Josh type relative who, went out to live in a geodesic dome in the desert. And, I think that's also very true to the Jewish experience.
Yes. Yes, I could definitely think of multiple people who he reminded me of.
Mm-hmm. The phrase that Lev is observant only in the sense that he noticed things is like, great phrase that I will be using going forward. And let's see here. I think that's just about it for me. Do you have any other notes that you want to make?
I don't think so. I think that we've covered. I think that we've pretty comprehensively. I guess I did like that Miri's failed attempts to hang on to her bodega job, and then the point where she's just like, how often do you get to take a road trip with a golem to murder
Yes.
anti-Semites? Like, some things are more important. But that, like, I liked that she made the effort, because something that often bothers me in stories is how blasé people are about losing their jobs. And it's like, if you were really as precarious as the story is making you out to be, you'd be a lot more anxious about this.
Oh yeah, no,
And Miri is exactly the right amount of anxious about this, which is that she's really anxious about it until it becomes clear that it is too late, at which point she just stops thinking about it entirely.
Yeah, so we both know / have been people who are like, family is not going to save me. Nobody's going to save me. I better hold on to this fucking stupid job that I have,
Yeah.
And you don't not think about that.
Right.
You know.
And so it's just a real pet peeve of mine in stories how often people just sort of cheerfully quit their job to pursue, their adventure. And it's like, but how are you going to pay rent when you get home?
Well, I mean, she literally lives above the bodega. She's homeless now if she lives
Exactly.
in the
Well, presumably at this point, hopefully either at this point she can beg her way back into the job, or, I guess Len is going to have her sleeping on his couch for a while.
I mean, clearly he has room for people.
Yes.
So, and I like the character of the golem. I mean, it's obviously sort of a comedy, sort of Borscht Belt, kind of shtick. But I thought it was well done.
Yeah.
Good stuff. But also I liked the interiority of the golem, because like the golem represents like, that real brute, deep down, like resentment and loyalty, that is sort of at the very heart of a lot of human culture. And I think that I don't know why I say, of course it's his. He has a schmuck, or rather pointedly doesn't have, but should.
Right.
His sort of, he really hates thinking, and sort of his, and will be resentful if he is made to think. But like the sort of the ways in which he can work within the rubric of like, protecting Jews through violence that he can't change, like the ways that he can operate within that, I thought were very well, sketched out.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I like the random. Actually, I want to ask you, what did you think about the random poetry in the middle?
Oh, that was the. I mean, that's a real poem, like not written by the author.
Yes.
And I thought that was letting black voices speak, so that he didn't have to do it. Which actually, and let me just say this. I think that the whole, like, you don't get to speak about the lived experiences of people who, aren't you is super overblown, and is actually a way to divide people and to prevent them from communicating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that felt like another cowardly thing in this book, like just sort of abdicating the stage so that somebody else could talk about the civil rights aspect, and then coming back on, to talk about my own thing. Was not a fan.
Yeah. I mean, that's reasonable.
Yeah. My final note is that don't take 20 milligram edibles. Even if you're experienced, you may get high enough to ruin your life by making a golem. If you do that, that's too much. But
all right,
I'll leave you all with that on that note.
All right. That's a good note to leave on. Words of wisdom.
Yes. All right. I'm glad that we got through this without having a bad argument. I was really worried. So
I was not super worried, because it's not like we're actually that far apart in our positions. It's just.
Yes, it's just about, it's all tactical at the end of the day, really.
Right. Yeah. It's largely tactical, and to some degree are,
who we hang out with and talk to on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I mean, mine runs the gamut, so.
Yeah, mine runs much less of the gamut than yours. So, but yeah.
But yeah, no, it is largely tactical, and which again is why I liked that the book talked about some of the tactical stuff. Should I stop recording and export now?
No, I think that's a fine way.
Okay.
That's a fine thing to include in the actual episode.
Okay.
So what time am I picking you up tomorrow morning?
Is this also going into the actual episode?
I don't know, maybe a little local color. We're taking the cat to the vet.
We're taking Anshul just for a checkup. He's fine.
Yes, he's fine.
It's just time for his yearly checkup and rabies booster. Though he got 3 rabies boosters last year because he kept catching bats. So,
okay, that's the note to end on.
Okay.
All right.